I'm tired tonight. Could you tell? I didn't do our intro right, but actually, I have a really good excuse. I was thinking about dragons. Do you think about dragons? I think about dragons a lot. And of course, one of the reasons I'm a little bit tired and I need my stuffed toy tonight is we've been working on our Kickstarter for our Draco Alchemicus launch. So you guys, you're going to love it. It's got dragons. And more Draco Alchemicus means alchemical dragon. There are dragons in it. Yes, I've been thinking a lot about dragons. And I am teaching my course at the University of Chicago on Tolkien. We just started term this week. And yes, therefore, I'm thinking about Tolkien, thinking about dragons and Faërie and what they mean and why dragons are so enticing to want to seek after, desiring dragons. And of course, we have to do what we planned to do last week, which was show you the realm of Faërie. So welcome to the Mosaic Ark. And I already played the intro, so now I'll just bring her in. She's here.
I'm all out of alignment now because of this.
I can't do this. So last week I was like struggling against like daylight savings time or whatever it was, right? I can't remember. And then this week you were saying like, what time is it? It's like I don't even know what calendar we're on anymore. The streams have crossed and we're out there in some kind of, here's my dragon flying, right? Mystical, magical land.
He's probably got a better concept of time than we do at the moment.
The dragon's coming in for yeah. So hi everybody, we're here to talk about dragons tonight. I guess you want to know why.
Yes.
Yes. Well, so for real, as I said in my late intro just now, so we are working on our Kickstarter for our Draco Alchemicus campaign, Act 1. It's going to have 5 acts, but we're going to focus the campaign just now on the first act because that's the one we have written. And we have our artist, Zé Nuno Fraga, making, oh my gosh, it's travel into fairyland ecstasy, looking at the drawings that he makes for our stanzas. It's like, maybe we can actually write poetry if drawings like this come out of it. So be looking for that. It's going to be coming up in the next month, and we're going to be really hoping that you are encouraged to give us money and support the publication of our first act. Because you want this, you want this, you want to save civilization by iambic pentameter and dragons. Dragon.
Yeah, this is where our virtuous gold digging kicks in.
We have to. How else? I mean, we want treasure, dragon. And all of the stuff that everyone is always talking about. You know how boring it is hearing people saying, oh, civilization is dying. And it's like, what are you doing to create culture? Have you learned to scan yet? Da-dum, 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 right? I don't want to hear anything about the greatness of, Anglo culture if you can't write iambic pentameter. Just saying. Because as we've proved in previous episodes, that's it. That's kind of what we have, English. Right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, she thinks we have other things too, and that we should fight the Englishness. But I'm saying as someone who basically has English as her language, we got to work at it.
I don't want to fight English. I want to conquer English.
Ooh,
I think
dragon.
That's a better way of describing it.
We need to bring a dragon in and hoard English.
Something like that. How would I describe it? It needs to be colonized by the cross.
Yes.
Yeah, English has to be colonized by the cross.
A giant pile of gold in iambic pentameter with a cross at the top. Because, of course, the giant pile of gold that the Elizabethan pirates made was filled with crosses that they stole from the Spanish. So
what did they do with them? Where did all these crosses go?
I think they melted them down and made coin out of them. Gold digging whores that they were.
Yes, they were. The gold digging Elizabethans. I've been thinking about this. The word Anglo very triggering this week because of what's been happening here in Australia. I'm not sure if I I've talked to you about it yet. I've been posting things on my channel about a few Catholic protests that have been happening in Sydney.
Ooh.
And a lot of our Lebanese brothers and sisters are very unhappy with the behavior of some people outside a church in Sydney. So they got into a little bit of a scuffle. But very, very odd to see the media talk about them as white supremacists when they're not Anglos.
Well, you said, I of course read your Telegram, definitely. And you've said some very interesting things about the whiteness of the supremacy.
Oh yeah, it's odd. It just occurred to me in the last week that everyone who's claiming that they're fighting it is really admitting that they think that it's real, in the sense that they actually believe that whiteness is supreme, which I find very strange because I don't. But you know.
Well, I mean, for me, I mean, we're talking about the whiteness of race rather than whiteness of the light of the sun or the whiteness of baptismal robes or something. I mean, the problem when I hear white supremacy, it's like, yes, I need context here.
Well, it's just odd. There's no context given. So I've been considering what's been happening with the Lebanese in Australia, because for anyone who's been reading my content for long enough, you'll understand that they're not white, and especially this political category of race that happens down here. The Lebanese are not classed as white. I don't know what would be the case in America, but they were involved in race riots in Sydney in 2005 against the Anglos, and so we've sort of entered this very strange moment with the language where people are throwing words with zero meaning, or it's like English has sort of entered its peak magical flexibility in terms of the manipulation that people are doing with it.
Yep.
So it has to be captured, because otherwise we're not in control of what we're saying anymore. We have no control over what the language is doing to us and how we're using the language. So yeah, it has to be captured. It's sort of it's become so ambiguous now that you can't communicate properly in English even in Australia, because people are unable to use words correctly. So they're calling Lebanese people, Lebanese Christians that are protecting their church from crucifix desecration, white supremacists. It's just bizarre. So
yeah. I think that you said it, I think last week, beautifully, about the whiteness being this thing. We want to be colored. We want to have the rainbow and the light and the fullness of the spectrum of our existence. You said it better than that. So the whiteness, I mean, I think maybe we've never said it quite so bluntly as we need to, but it's clearly a referent for Anglo. I mean, that's in the United States, Anglo, whatever, WASP or Anglo-Saxon, but it's English, and therefore it's literally nobody else. The Irish are not white in the Anglo lexicon. The Welsh, who knows what color they are? Dragons are red, and the Scots, they're red-haired, and so I mean, even within the United Kingdom, the whiteness in this sort of conceptualization of what is this supremacy that we're supposed to battle against is specifically the Anglo-ness, the English. And I've been wondering about why it got mapped onto Christianity, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But one, I think, it's that some of the stuff I was reading in January about the image of Jesus in the Victorian Protestant storytelling and art and so forth. And there's that phrase, and I don't even remember which poem it's from. It's from a poem, because all of these things are always from poems that stick in your head and craft spells on you, right? Work spells on you. The pale Galilean. Right, so that Jesus is represented as white in this, what is that phrase? It's from it's from a poem. And it's like, you've conquered, pale Galilean, and I think that a lot of this sort of, whiteness of Jesus is simply coming out of that one phrase. Because as we've talked many times, and you show the icons, you look at the spread of Christianity in the ancient world, whiteness was not ever affixed to it as a concept until the 19th century. But now it is, and so we're fighting this dual problem of, one, the empire, which we recognize as Vox Day calls it, clown world, crumbling in its financial and political and military institutions as we speak. And then there's Christianity that's attached to it, and too attached to it in many people's minds, of course, because they think that to be Christian, you also need to have these particular European political institutions, and those are orthogonal is the usual best way to say it. They're not even in parallel, right? They're at odds with each other, and for centuries actually were. The battle between church and state was real, and in the Reformation it was as get lost to the state, because in England the Queen became the defender of the faith and the head of the church. Now we have king as the head of the church, or whatever it is, right? And so you've blended church and state with the Reformation, and therefore forever after these things are corrupted mutually, I suppose. The Vatican, we'll leave the Vatican aside right now.
Well, this is why today I'm dressed like St. Augustine's mother, for everyone who can see my amazing African bling. In homage to Saint Monica of Hippo, the African Berber, because Saint Augustine himself referred to himself as an African. I forget where the quote is, but I have it somewhere here at home, with him referring to himself and a few others as the Africans. So this kind of is in the background of our apostolic tradition, that this is the place where the faith grew and the faith blossomed. So seeing news reports, the kinds of things that have been said this week are giving me migraines, because it's what they're saying essentially in calling Lebanese Catholics white supremacists is they're saying we all have to accept the Anglo church and state unification that defines Christianity as an Anglo institution, right, which I just outright reject because it's false. It's not right. The greatest saints that we have are men from Africa and the Middle East and Asia Minor. These are not white men.
Not women. Anglo, right?
Yes. Well, in the political way of describing race,
right,
that Australia uses when it uses the term white, So, I just this has all been kind of bubbling in my mind, because the Christians in Australia are very upset with the blasphemous things that are being said on the television the last couple of weeks, and really our Mediterranean Catholics are suddenly very activated, because they're realizing that now they're getting lumped into categories which have no relevance to them, and they're being painted as they're being painted with words and with the magic English words which don't apply. So we're stuck in this linguistic battle at the moment. And it's difficult to have it in Australia because we don't even have an official national language. So we're all speaking English that isn't an official language because we don't have one. So it's like the battle over the language that isn't. It's very odd, very, very strange.
Well, this is actually perfectly topical to our dragon theme and our Tolkien theme and our problem of what are we longing for? I think I'm looking. So I've been rereading Tolkien's fairy stories, and there's one place he has a nice definition of spell, and now I can't remember where it is. It's both well, I'll just have to hopefully be able to find it later. It ends up in gospel as, you know, the good word, and it is the spell that, you know, controls other living men, as he puts it. And so when you were talking about this problem that we're in this spell of language, that's precisely our problem tonight. It's like where the dragons are, and it's like I'm dragging the Mosaic Ark over to the Forge of Tolkien, and let's talk about like what it is we're longing for. And this is my segue back into the pictures that we had set up last week for talking about this problem, but we ended up having to talk about sacrifice and Girardian doubles and scapegoats and everything like that, to get you to the point where we can now return to the feathered image of the Mass of St. Gregory and say, what's going on in this picture? It's like, why would this be the picture that twinned so powerfully for me when I was looking at it, but also in the representations in the 16th century with the sacrifice that the Aztec are doing when they're feeding the sun with the blood. Right. So is this an I gave you some homework to do this about, so I'll have to quiz you a little bit. Is this an iconography that you're actually familiar with? This it's
No.
St. Gregory. So in the image that I have on screen right now, it's the feathers, the Inca feather image that's sent to the Pope in the mid 16th century. But the iconography is very, very popular. This is a 15th century Dutch image. I think I made a list. Oh, I made a list of them last time. You forget it. I'm not playing art historian tonight. You'll just forget. Just look at the pictures, right? Okay. So the
Look at the
pretty pictures and gold go right, because that's kind of the point, that in the image there's Saint Gregory the Great, who was Pope in the late 6th, early 7th century, dies in 604. So he would never have been dressed quite like this. It's a late medieval setup, right? He is in full, you know, papal regalia before the altar, kneeling, and above the altar or behind the altar, or it sort of depends. It changes a little bit from scene to scene the way it's depicted. There is Christ covered in wounds, bloody. In this one, he's sort of standing on the altar, right where the chalice and the paten are for the bread and the wine, surrounded by in you know, sort of proper like Dungeons and Dragons attributes of your player character, with all of the instruments of his passion. Okay, so there's the Pope saying Mass, and over the altar here there's another. I'll show you. This one's a Dürer. I do remember some of them. This one's like to one side, and you see that the Jesus Man of Sorrows is standing in a box, right? So he's sort of represented as if rising from the grave already, which he's not. I mean, this is in no way meant to be a historical image, because it's not showing anything that ever actually happened to St. Gregory, even in story, or is it showing what actually happened at the resurrection? It's this something representation of Christ as he looked after he was crucified, surrounded by the instruments that crucified him.
Okay, so the way you've described it, it sounds to me like there's some kind of time travel happening.
Okay. That wasn't what I was thinking, but go ahead.
Well, I don't know how to explain that thought. No, I can't really explain it.
Well, so I mean, there's some kind of travel. There's portal happening here. A portal opened and something happened.
Yeah.
That for sure is what's going. It's interesting. Now I can't remember how many pictures I put in this. Oh, right. Okay, so close your eyes. Go back. Okay, so It's in different kind. The iconography was very popular. There's lots and lots of examples of it from the later Middle Ages. What's funny about the pictures is it's not necessarily clear that Gregory sees anything. Right? In some of the images, like the first one, the painting I showed, he does seem to be looking at Christ, and Christ is showing the side wound and looking down at him. But in others, it's not necessarily clear that Gregory sees this array of vision of whatever it is. It's like, what is it, right? And in the Dur, I'll go back to the Dur, what's bizarre about it is they all look like physically modeled, as if Christ really is standing there on the altar in the box with all these. So it's a crazy image, because you're saying, is this stuff there? Is it real? Is Gregory meant to be seeing it? Is anybody who's with him? He's always accompanied by the full, array of deacons and altar boys and things like that. It's not necessarily clear that anybody else sees what's going on either.
Okay, so it's an image that they're not necessarily seeing, so it's not a hallucination.
Correct.
And it's not a vision necessarily, because they're not visualizing it. They can't see it necessarily.
Correct.
So it seems to me like this is the time travel thing. I'm going to sound so woo-woo, but who cares?
Go for it.
It sounds like the depiction of parallel dimension, where you've got past and present overlapping in the same place.
There's definitely a sense of this interdimensionality, right? So this image that I'm showing now is a copy of the image that, in fact, is supposed to be the model for what Gregory sees over the altar, which is the Man of Sorrows, which, as I was, burbling my way through that description, saying it's never meant to be historically a moment that the Gospels depict, right? There's no moment when the Gospels depict Christ dying or wounded, not on the cross, standing in his coffin. But there is, and this is interesting for those who insist that the Orthodox never do this gruesome, bloody stuff. An icon that was known to be in Rome in the late Middle Ages. So that's why the Gregory Mass iconography is late Middle Ages. There's this icon brought to Rome from Constantinople. It's a mosaic, and it's known as the Man of Sorrows. The one I'm showing on the screen now is a copy of that. Apparently the original one that was brought from Constantinople is lost. What's interesting about this one is it's shown surrounded by other relics. So it's like Jesus dead in his coffin, but sitting upright, surrounded by lots of relics of all of the other saints. So there are all this interdimensionality constantly in this representation of, well, what, right? What are we seeing? One argument that's often made, and the article that I showed you to help us think about this was by my dissertation advisor, my teacher, Caroline Bynum, where she's talking about, it's like, usually what people in the scholarship argue about what's going on in this iconography is it's showing the truth of the transubstantiation, right? That it's trying to show the reality of what, by the later Middle Ages in Catholic teaching, Western Latin teaching, is said to happen in the Mass, which is that when the priest says the words of consecration over the bread and the wine, they are transubstantiated, in the fancy Aristotelian term, into the flesh and blood of Christ. And then there's huge debates throughout the Middle Ages about exactly what that means, right? Is it historically his flesh and blood? Is it mystically his flesh and blood, but it's somehow real flesh and blood? So there's some kind of real transformation here, right? And of course, in the Protestant critique of all of this by the 16th century, as I'm not even sure this is true, but we'll go with it, as the urban legend about Protestant critiques goes, it's the hocus pocus. Right? It's the hocus corpus,
yes,
which is the hocus pocus magic spell. Here we've got magic, bread and wine that's now magically the body and blood of Christ, magically proven in this iconography to be there on the altar. Ooh, isn't that gross?
So this is when they're saying this is connected to the reports of actual Eucharists becoming bloody flesh. Is this why the Protestants are accusing Catholics of performing magic? Because of these proof miracles that they have, where they're the priests in particular parishes were presenting transubstantiated Eucharists.
So
I mean, it could look very voodoo to people from the outside. This is to play devil's advocate.
This is kind of voodoo-like, right? That's why in my original plan for this discussion, which is going to shatter into a billion different rainbows as we talk through with all of these problems, that I was saying, it's like this juxtaposed with the Aztec heart thing. Sure, right? It's supposed to be real flesh and blood, and here he is really bleeding. And what you're referring to is what Caroline, she went on to do a full book on these blood miracles, these bloody host miracles. Called the book is called Wonderful Blood. And yes, in the later Middle Ages, there are shrines that are said to have these hosts that miraculously were seen to bleed. One is at Wilsnack. That's all I remember. And there's a number of them in Germany, which is where those miracles were quite popular. And certainly from a modern perspective, or from a Protestant perspective, that looks like you're doing like magic in the usual fantasy world sense of you've said words and matter transforms. Abracadabra. Yeah,
it does. Which would be, if I put Protestant hat on, would be my first critique of what Catholics are doing in the Mass. And what we're doing when we're claiming that the Eucharist is actually the flesh and the blood of Christ.
Right.
All right, so we have a big problem because so we've got something that looks like voodoo. How then do we defend the Mass as not being just another kind of human sacrifice?
Yep.
It's a big problem.
It's a huge problem. And that's why we got distracted last time with all the Girardian doubling and scapegoat and things like that, which is... we're going to come back to that, don't worry. Not you right now.
We went off the spectrum last week.
We went off the spectrum last week. We had to tell you all that other stuff. But this is why I put them together, because it's saying the Mass has been criticized within Christianity for centuries now as being nothing more than, myth, like as pagan or as magical as those heathen myths that we're supposed to reject about the Norse gods or the Aztec gods or anybody else's gods. Isn't, as you're saying, isn't this just voodoo or magic of an ordinary diabolical sort?
Well, that's what it seems like to describe a blood host without having any, from the perspective of an outsider, a non-catechized Orthodox or Catholic, to explain this process to somebody, it would be like saying, okay, we're animating a fetish.
Right.
We're animating something, essentially idolizing bread and then animating it through magic.
In fact, exactly, right? It's like you've spoken spoken words over the matter, and the spell works, and because it's magic, it transforms the matter.
Yes. Seems very alchemical.
We're sitting on this really, really hard, guys, so that you realize that we know the problem. Because and sometimes in the world of the internet, which is disembodied and discarnate, it seems to be alleged that like nobody understands that this is probably something that people were concerned about in the past. Oh, don't you know how you guys are just doing magic, and saying we don't think that's what it is, but it takes some work. And so this is Caroline, when she looked at these pictures and she said, okay, that in the art history has seemed to be the problem, that they're sort of trying to show something real, like what is actually being transformed in the mass and what. Her argument, though, is that it isn't about transubstantiation. This particular iconography, the Mass of St. Gregory, is not, in fact, about the zombie problem. Okay. Oh dear. It's like, wait a minute, we just set you all up to say aha, but no, it's not. Woof. Pull the rug out from under you there. It's sometimes I feel like we as scholars can make too fine of distinctions. I think it can be that, probably, because understanding what it means to say in this ritual, we have access in our time travel back to the moment when Christ is historically crucified. I mean, there is a time travel element to it. I think you were right in thinking that there is a kind of saying that we want to be witnesses to the crucifixion. And we are potentially witnesses to the crucifixion at the Mass, because it is being done in remembrance of Christ and in remembrance of his suffering. So it is time travel and also something else.
Well, it's time travel in the sense that when Christ instituted the Eucharist, the Last Supper, he said, as often as you do this, do it in remembrance of me. And he didn't say, this will be my body and this will be my blood. He said, this is. Just that phrasing alone, it makes me think, okay, so this is present continuous. It's not I know this sounds very woo-woo, but
you really need to stop apologizing for that. We're going woo-woo tonight.
We are going woo-woo.
You got your dress on. I'm
in Africa. Yeah, like I just we're by Anglos.
We do have some in the chat insisting on the African whiteness. Silent Draco? You be silent. No, he says kilt steer. At the time, the saints from Africa and Middle East were definitely considered white. Well, they're definitely considered Roman, which is what Augustine and company
it's not
were.
The same thing.
We would differ on that, whether it's the same room.
It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing, because why did white Australia then classify Southern Italians as non-whites? I'm using.
Well, we're time traveling across different empires too, I think.
Yeah. I'm not speaking like an American. I'm using my own country's way of describing these things, specifically so I can contrast it with what you guys are all doing up there in North America.
You're in a totally different, Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere. Like, we get to flip the world.
Yeah. We're in the antipodes.
You guys do realize she's in the future right now. She knows what she's talking about. She's been here already. We're yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. So, messages from the future. See, we are time traveling now. That's good, because we've got a good indication of what's going on in the Mass of St. Gregory just by you and I having this conversation in 2 frames, right? But we're not at the same time.
But we're not.
No.
Okay, so you were talking about the Mass is present. It's a continuing present in the historical world, in Anno Domini, right? So it's not eternal. It's actually in time, not out of time. But that we are somehow, and the Mass, seen into something else. That other thing that we see into. So the interesting thing with I'm now with the altarpiece with the mosaic Man of Sorrows surrounded by the relics, that when we altarpieces are meant to show something of the mystery that's happening in the Mass. And it is interesting. I've now been going to St. John Cantius for a full year, and I'll say, face the altar, guys. I really, really understand why the traditional Latin Mass people prefer the traditional Latin Mass. One, because there is a precision and an elegance. One of my friends I took with me to Mass, and he said it's kind of mathematical in the precision and economy of the movements of the priest and the servers at the altar. But I'm absolutely, it matters that they face the altar. They face whatever's the altarpiece is trying to depict, right? They're facing, and we watch them and witness with them and support them in their standing before. You guys know that's where we're going tonight, right? Whatever it is that we're standing before when we are offering that, making that offer. And here with this big reliquary altarpiece with the Man of Sorrows, it's showing you something of where you are when you're at the Mass. The saints are all not here. Their bodies are here, but where are they? Yeah. So how do you think, so we recognize that modern people in our particular media environment have difficulty with these mysteries, and we've acknowledged that from the outside they look a bit strange and could look like voodoo or witchcraft or Aztec human sacrifice. How should we help them get to the place that they can see what we see?
Facing the altar. So I'm thinking of this because we do, in the Coptic tradition, we do this. The liturgy is all about facing the iconostasis behind the altar, the area where we have the big icons of the Lord. So usually what you'll see in a Coptic church is just inside the little altar nave, it usually has a curtain across. The curtain is open for the liturgy. So we have a revealing that happens during that liturgy that is not present at any other moment. The curtain is closed, and then once Abuna, the priest, comes in to formally start the liturgy, the curtain is open, which is recording the temple imagery of what the Lord has done for us in rending the curtain open. Suddenly we're seeing something inside. So we go into the Holy of Holies, and then we're looking, the altar is there, and behind is usually very, very large icon of the Lord, but fully very, very big. So ratio no longer exists in the same way. You know, suddenly the temporal rules no longer apply. Spatial and temporal rules are changed as soon as that curtain is open. And our priest will face the altar for the majority of the liturgy. He will look maybe 2 or 3 times at the congregation during the service, but that's it. For the rest of the time, he faces Christ. He faced Christ at the altar. So I think that's probably the thing that I would start off with, is like, we have this revealing that happens during that liturgy. Something is going on there that is not happening at any other moment. Yeah.
So the thing is, I'm totally with you. I see all of that as you're describing it. The veil is drawn back. You go into the Holy of Holies. There's this something else that you're seeing. But my guess is a lot of people are going to be like, they're going to be looking at those massive St. Gregory images and simply seeing a magic trick. Can we think of any analogy that might help them recognize that they do know this experience, even if they aren't aware of it?
Yes.
What about dragons?
Should I tell them, or should we let them? Should we let them guess for a little bit?
Wait, it's the great and powerful Oz, right? How do we do this? And this is. This was the great, like, so one, to understand what Catholics and Copts and Orthodox and all Christians think like, you have to learn to think in analogy. As we talked about last time with Dorothy Sayers and saying it's all metaphor, right? So everything that we understand is always mapping. Language does this, right? You have a word that you're mapping onto, and what you were saying earlier, Kiltz, about we use white, and then it can mean these multiple things. And then you're saying the context means that you don't know which one it is, and that, you know, language has this ambiguity so that it can mean multiple things. And so we're it's like we're used to all of this conjuration, to use a loaded term, in our ordinary exercise of our imagination. It's interesting that then when we can bring it into liturgy, we bring it into the understanding of the divine, people suddenly forget how to think in correspondences and references.
Yeah, because the West has been liturgically damaged, so it doesn't think in terms of it doesn't think in image language anymore, and it doesn't think in ritualized language anymore in the sense of Christianity, as much as other parts of the world do, at least in my experience. Because the more the smells and bells are bleached out of the liturgical practice, the less you actually have to read in the liturgy. If by reading, I don't mean like alphabetic reading. I mean reading in the symbolic behavior and the patterns of the liturgy and the icons. And what the priest is doing, we're reading it as we're going through, but it's not just with the eyes, it's multisensorial literacy. And this is not normal for white people. When they think about Christianity, usually they're thinking like Anglo-Protestants in Australia. It's like you go into the building, you say some prayers, everything's nice, it's all very polite, blah, 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 blah.
Their walls are all white. Maybe this is what white supremacy is. Yeah. It's their walls. They whitewashed over all of the art.
Iconoclasm.
It's iconoclasm. White supremacy. There, we've solved it. It's iconoclasm.
Yep.
It's simply it's erasing all of the art, so all you see are the white walls.
Yeah, no color. Icons, no color.
No icons, no color. But this is my great analogy. I think the great and powerful Oz is the point there, but the point is he's green, right? Let's go to the next one. There we go. That's the one I thought I had next.
Oh yeah,
dragons, right? We are all convinced in our imaginative theater going that we can see dragons. No, it's just Benedict Cumberbatch in a weird light thing, so that they can film him making faces crawling around on the floor, so that they can CGI guys can put the smog on him, and there we have dragon. Here, this one's my little stuffed one's nice and real.
So this is the green screen image when he's crawling on the ground.
Right, above a Comedy Central one where they have smog in the outfit to do the image capture. It's pretty funny, right? It's because the dragon doesn't exist. I mean, I think maybe they did make an animatronic head or something. I'm not quite sure. Like some of the King Kong back in my childhood, they did make the hand for Jessica Lange to sit in, which obviously I remember that because like she was sexy and stuff. But anyway, I'm distracted. Cumberbatch obviously can do smog, and they have him crawling around on the ground so they can image capture his body movements to make a realistic dragon. And then project it onto this screen that the actors have to perform in front of without ever being able to see what they're doing. Kind of like Gregory the Great at the Mass. Everybody with me?
Yep. The multi-dimensional experience of being a green screen actor.
Gregory the Great did it first. Right? Because one of the things that Caroline, I think I said this, but I'll repeat it. It's like Caroline said, not everybody in the scene necessarily seems to see what's going on, in that the green screen space of wherever the Man of Sorrows is being realized. And yet you, as the viewer of the painting, as indeed the viewer of the movie, see it. And there is some sense of that is more real than the reality we have as the audience. That the smog is more real. These dragons are real. My little Beanie Baby one, is more real than you watching Benedict Cumberbatch pretend to be the dragon. Like when you go to the movie, you believe that that's the dragon, or at least some part of you wants to believe that you have that desire for dragons that Tolkien talks about, desperately wanting them to be there. Why? Right? And the sort of mystery of what the dragon realm is for us. Tolkien was obviously Catholic, and so probably everything that he's doing has a liturgical resonance that you want to pay attention for.
Yeah, it smells and bells in theaters because it's the bombardment of the senses in order to activate the imagination, isn't it?
So what I was thinking about with the green screens, it's like most of us know watching the CGI, it's not real. It's like we're wanting to, they had to film Cumberbatch making Smaug because there needed to be some kind of real body behind all the CGI. It's not convincing just to make the animations. They always, they need the voices, or maybe the AI will do the voices, who knows, but we do seem to be able to tell the difference between it's totally fake and there's human reality within it.
It's the faces. So something about it. I think this is why the iconography is so important, because if you're in pure animation, you've removed the real human face. But those kinds of blends with the actor in front of a green screen, they can do all sorts of things, but the human face is still there. So it's tolerable as this kind of blend of art and reality. It's a kind of icon, as opposed to making something which is completely artificial.
Well, I like what you're saying, but it needs to have that human, the human face, the mirror of the human in even the monsters. And the dragons are more realistic to us insofar as they image us. Yeah, which is a good start. But I was also thinking about, it's like this is Hermione handing books to the hands that magically, make things happen. That, when we're watching the movies, it is funny going through it, sort of finding all of the ways in which they use these green screen prop guys to make the magic happen. That there is, and I had a thought about the Hermione last week. What was I thinking? To think about Hermione. I'm trying to remember what I had in the thought about Hermione. Oh, that they're powers, right? That they're actual powers out there. She has to hand the book to actual human beings, but in the movie they green screen out the hands, so it looks like the books are shelving themselves, right? But the feeling of power that all of these effects creates is, again, there's a human agent behind it. I mean, we're always somehow that we're constantly making these activities in the fantasy realm that still have the mark of our humanity on them.
Yeah, we're still participating. We're not just observing. I'm thinking like when the curtain is drawn in the liturgy, the priest does a little lap of the church, and it's almost like when Hermione's handing the books to those green screen hands. It's almost like we're becoming the green screen hands for the priest in a lot of ways. because we're there, but the priest isn't really paying much attention to us for the majority of the mass. But if we aren't there, there isn't a liturgy. It's the same with the altar servers, which are sort of doing a similar thing. They're there, but they're not there. It's this effect of a magic spell can be done in solitude. A liturgy cannot be done in solitude. That green screen activity would be impossible without people's hands popping out of the bookcase for the actress that played Hermione to hand the books. So that's kind of what it's made me think of. It's participatory. Even if there's I don't know if this is making sense.
Well, it's everything that we're doing is drawing out for me what Tolkien describes about Faërie, right? As a realm, as a place we want to go in our stories and our imagination, as a place that he has a long discussion of how drama doesn't work as well as literature, because acting it all out is very, very hard to make it look real. And the green screen and the CGI is all trying to do the magic that Tolkien says it's like on stage you can't achieve it. And we keep trying, right? It was like the entire movie industry. We got Silent Draco saying Weka Studios is good about having physical elements and props. I mean, yes, we want it. The longing is to travel into this, and just to set us up a little bit with Tolkien. In the opening of Fairy Stories, I think he says everything that we need to know. I propose to speak about fairy stories, though I'm aware that this is a rash adventure. And you realize this is Tolkien, so every word is like 18 references. That he's speaking about fairy stories, and it's an adventure, rashly. Okay, and that's even his name, right? In the Notion Club papers, he's rash, bold. Referent. Faërie is a perilous land. So he said he's going to speak about fairy stories, and what he immediately starts talking about is the realm, right? Is a perilous land, and in it are pitfalls for the unwary and dungeons for the overbold. And again, I recognize he's put his name in that too, the rash bold. And overbold I may be accounted, because Tolkien means rash bold. And overbold I may be accounted, for though I have been a lover of fairy stories since I learned to read, and have at times thought about them, I have not studied them professionally. Snicker. That's basically all he does. I have been hardly more than a wandering explorer or trespasser in the land, full of wonder, but not of information. So it's a realm with wonder and danger, and rash. It's rash to want to go there. The realm of fairy story is wide and deep and high and filled with many things. The wide and deep, I'm getting echoes off of something. He uses a lot of his same vocabulary over and over again in all of his writings, and the wide and deep is the song of sorrow that is sung. All manner of beasts and birds are found there, shoreless seas and stars uncounted. Beauty that is an enchantment and an ever-present peril, both joy and sorrow as sharp as swords. In that realm a man may perhaps count himself fortunate to have wandered, but its very richness and strangeness tie the tongue of a traveler who would report them. And while he is there, it is dangerous for him to ask too many questions, lest the gates should be shut and the keys be lost. Now, it's very easy to say, okay, so he's just described fairy, and of course it's dangerous and perilous. But there's other things that are like clues that he's really actually talking about something else, that it's an enchantment, that it's beautiful, that it has joy and sorrow as sharp as swords.
Should I guess?
Oh, I wonder if I trained you well enough to guess where I'm going to inevitably take you. But because everybody, so like all the dragon stories. I mean, he says when in when he's a child he wanted dragons, because when he's talking about whether fairy stories are particularly for children, and saying that he had the dragon had the trademark of fairy written plain upon him. I desired dragons with a profound desire. Of course, I didn't want any dragons around, but I wanted dragons. I wanted the fairy. I wanted some. Yeah. But then what he's described, he's wanting the dragons take you there. The dragons take you into fairy. So what is it? What is fairy? What is he describing? It's dangerous, full of joy and sorrow and peril.
That sounds like being in love, doesn't it?
But it's a place. He means it as it's a specific realm, and so a lot of what he does in On Fairy Stories. I'm teaching this tomorrow, so you guys are getting a preview. That he spends a lot of time describing how to get there, and language is a lot of it. So we're talking about travel into fairy tonight, and we've been touching on words and spells and things like that. But I think maybe I haven't got that in my head properly to say it. But he's doing it by way of particular kind of crafting of language. He has talking about adjectives and green suns and things like that. But the desire for it and the longing to be able to see and visit, and the way he describes it, he's setting up a very particular kind of longing for that realm.
It's the it's like the transcendence from the mundane, from the purely carnal world, purely material world.
Well, so interestingly, he says that men are actually supernatural, unlike fairies. We actually have a supernatural element. We have souls, right? That are about so our world. I mean, one of the things he says fairy stories do is enable us to see our world more clearly, because all of the things that are in fairy, I guess I could go back to he
the realm of the soul.
Yeah. But he says fairy stories as a whole have three faces: the mystical towards the supernatural, which is when we're thinking about fantasy, it's like, oh, dragons are supernatural. Not exactly, right? But mystically, they point to the supernatural, which he says men are, but elves aren't, right? So there's something about our immortality in the mystical. The magical towards nature. So then we go back to Hermione playing with books, right? There's something natural in magic, not supernatural, just natural powers of the physical. And the mirror of scorn, this is in fairy stories, of pity, of the mirror of scorn and pity towards man, which you get when you say the elves have powers that we don't, but they're a mirror, right? What we were talking about with the problem of being able to see our own face in the dragons.
Well, this experience we have when we're looking at icons too. The icons are mirrors for us as a race, as humanity, but also for ourselves as individuals. If we're talking with a saint, we're having this experience, transcending time, because they don't live in time anymore. They live in the eternal. But they're talking to us in time. So we've left this natural into the supernatural. And in talking with them, we see their holiness contrasted with our sinfulness. So it's like this staring at elves experience, because you're wondering how holy they are, or how holy they were and are, because it's both at the same time, and considering your own spiritual condition.
You think Tolkien went to mass?
I think so. Well, probably a couple of times
daily. Right, and he has in one of his letters talking to Christopher how, you know, in the mass is all of this. It's the drama of everything is in the mass. It's romance, it's tragedy, it's everything. Yeah. So, you know, spoiler alert, we're talking about the mass. We're talking about the liturgy. I think what Tolkien is actually describing in this essay on fairy stories is his experience of liturgy. But wait, there's more, right? So going back to Faërie actually has the same things that we have in this world. He says, stories about Faërie, that is, Faërie, the realm or state in which fairies have their being, is what we have in English. Faërie contains many things besides elves and fays, besides dwarfs, witches, trolls, giants, or dragons. It holds the seas, the sun, the moon, the sky, and the earth, and all things that are in it, tree and bird, water and stone, wine and bread, and ourselves, mortal men, when we are enchanted. Remember, he said that at the beginning, beauty that is an enchantment. Faërie is enchanted, full of joy and sorrow, as sharp as swords. Now, maybe you have to have spent your entire life thinking about Mary. Catch the referent there. Her joys, her sorrows, and swords that pierce her soul. So the thing that Tolkien describes about fairy stories ultimately is that they are they have a happy ending, right? And what he calls the consolation of the happy ending. I don't feel like I have the right picture on screen here for this consolation. That's not a consolation. So we have here Gandalf weeping in front of a green screen because he's trying to act to nobody. That there's this problem that to put Frodo or Bilbo in the scene with him, they had to green screen them in, and to make the Hobbit actor small, they had to film them separately. So here is Ian McKellen as Gandalf, green screened with no audience for his acting, right? So I think there's a priest offering the mass in front of an altar in which there's nothing, right? It's like no, that's not going to work. What did I put next? I hope. I'll do this one. So we have Alice going into Wonderland from the Tim Burton movie, where pretty much all of it's green screen. So everything that the actors had to do was imagining what the scene would be if, just like Gregory at the Mass, imagining what those with faith can see in his sacrifice, the actors are having to do in front of these green screens on these sets. Tolkien's doing that all the time, right? And he's thinking about how in the fairy story, because of language, because you're able to do this with the enchantment of your words, enchantment requires language. In English, it's chanting. Right? It's the spell casting of singing of the liturgy, the enchantment, the beauty that we experience in that enchantment, and the happy ending, which he describes as the eucatastrophe, this joyous turn, the good catastrophe, the sudden joyous turn, for there is no true end to any fairy tale. This joy, which is one of the things which fairy stories can produce supremely well, which he's saying is not as simply escapist or fugitive, right? In its fairy tale or otherworld setting, it is a sudden and miraculous grace. No word with Tolkien is ever accidental. never to be counted on or to recur. It does not deny the existence of discatastrophe, of sorrow and failure. The possibility of these is necessary to the joy of deliverance. It denies, in the face of much evidence, if you will, universal final defeat, and insofar is evangelium, giving a fleeting glimpse of joy beyond the walls of the world, poignant as grief. Wait, evangelium? Wait, what's that?
The evangel. The gospel.
The gospel. And I get like massively fairy tale-y weepy at this point too, because it's always the tears of the eucatastrophe, the breaking through into, and this is where he goes in the epilogue, right? The Gospels contain a fairy story or a story of a larger kind which embraces all the essence of fairy stories. The birth of Christ is the eucatastrophe of man's history. The resurrection is the eucatastrophe of the story of the incarnation.
The consolation of Israel is Christ. He's our consolation. The end of our grief and the beginning of our joy is the incarnation of the Son of God in the Virgin Mary. And the enchantment of the world, the re-enchantment of the world. Because we suddenly have a name that we didn't have before. Gabriel announced the pregnancy to the Virgin, which is Emmanuel. You will call him Emmanuel, God with us. Isn't that magnificent?
It's so beautiful.
Mm. So yeah, we live in a different time, different dimensional experience of space-time after the incarnation of Christ.
Well, and it's what I see in this, in the theatrical longing. Now we're still with the Alice in Wonderland, and you have the Mad Hatter walking with I forgot the characters, the two women, the princess women, and they're being supported by all of these green screen guys. Actually physically carrying them. I didn't realize that in watching the movie, right? It's like you see it that it's all green screened, and that they were physically prop guys having to carry these women on these litters. It's very medieval. Really just like or a Cleopatra or something, right? And that over and over and over again in our movie industry, we're doing exactly what Tolkien is describing in this longing for dragons, longing for the reality of fairy, to enter into it, for it to be real, when what we're always wanting, and what he says we're always wanting with the fairy stories, is to be in that story, which we are actually in.
Well, just like the Magi, the three Chaldeans that came
right
to visit Christ at his birth. It's that same kind of longing and pilgrimage to find this supernatural.
Well, that it actually is real, right? It's his famous phrase, legend and history have met and fused. In the gospel,
yes,
the myth and the history are both real. And so this longing for the reality of fairy, it's the longing for the secondary realm, he says, that you create through the storytelling. But I think had never properly occurred to me, even though I've been thinking about Tolkien for a very long time now, that he is in fact throughout this essay describing the Mass, that you are wanting to be going through that portal of enchantment into that realm where joy and sorrow are blended in song, which is what happens at the end of Lord of the Rings when they have the song of the minstrel on the field of Cormallen, which is you find yourself in the story, and the story is now being chanted, and you are in that story. It's the liturgy.
It's magnificent. It's like going back to the magi, but these men are tracking the stars. They're studying the astrological, and then they're following a new star in order to find Christ. But this is kind of the kind of a mirror to this experience, isn't it? Because it's like you're studying something like a story, and it's in the abstract. You're looking at the heavenly, but it's something removed until you're there in liturgy, seeing Christ. So it's not just this abstract astrological experience. It's not just something to be studied. It's something that you're participating in. Suddenly you're not just looking at the star of Christ, you're at his feet giving him gifts.
Right. So I realize the meta level here is brilliant, because I can flip through pictures. You have no idea what they're seeing while you're talking.
This is me with my constant green screening.
I know. It's like you're always green screening whatever it is I'm trying to talk about, because you can't see it because of the way the Skype connection works. So she's living this, you guys, as I'm doing it. And I forgot which pictures were in what order because I put them together last week. And so right now we have the Jurassic Park dinosaurs, right? Which we all want to believe were real. They're a little more real. It's like with Chris Pratt doing his training of the dinosaurs, which is like, obviously he's trying to do dog training. And I had not realized that not only are they like costume characters, but the cutaway guys, they show these guys are basically naked in these outfits. I think this is the way they filmed. I don't know. Right. But that they, the desire for dragons goes into the desire for these dinosaurs to be physically present with us constantly. I'm like getting to the next one. Oh, right. The superheroes, which is what I thought I was going to get to while you were talking about the Magi. That we're constantly wanting these beings of power to enter into our world as well. And yet the actors are always having to act as if flames and, cities are exploding behind them and nothing is happening. Except they're standing on sound stages with green screens behind them, and they're having to pretend to be frightened. And when you're talking about the Magi being able to see Christ as Emmanuel through their astrology, and that all of this fantasy work that we're doing in this green screening of the movies is clearly participating in that longing, which is what Tolkien describes as so the resurrection is the eucatastrophe of the story of the incarnation. This story begins and ends in joy. It has preeminently the inner consistency of reality, which is what he said successful fairy stories have, that they can have this sense of it's real. It's real. You want it to believe it's real, right? There is no tale ever told that men would rather find was true, and none which so many skeptical men have accepted as true on its own merits. For the art of it has the supremely convincing tone of primary art, that is, of creation. To reject it leads either to sadness or to wrath.
Like love.
Yes. That as well.
That's God. He the creator, So it makes sense that there is a resonance with the two. Because that's an enchanting experience for people. We have enormous amounts of ritual surrounding it. But really, if you think about it, so this is kind of interesting. I don't know why the thought just popped into my mind. But the wedding is a green screen event. Because you can't really prove that it's real. There's a lot of ritual involved in it and a lot of words to represent something that actually you have no tangible proof exists, but the ceremony proves that it exists.
I mean, an actual wedding, with a man and a woman.
Yes, a man and a woman getting married, the ceremony, because they can say that they love each other. It's a claim.
Right.
It's a faith claim. There's no proof. How do you prove it? How do you prove it's real? It could be biochemical. It could be purely materialistic experience, neurotransmitters making them, hallucinate that they're both in love. There's no way of proving it. But it's a faith claim that we accept religiously, regardless of whether or not you're atheist or a believer in the creator. People accept the faith claim of love when they participate in this ritual of a wedding ceremony as proof that it's real. It's the same thing with the liturgical experience when we're trying to explain the priest facing the altar and saying the prayers and saying the blessing and then having that Eucharist reveal itself. The bread and the wine becoming the body and the blood of the Lord. It's the same thing. We're attending the wedding ceremony, the Lamb and his bride, which from the outside looks magical, but then so does a wedding. It just depends on your perspective, because really, marriage could just be a magic ceremony where people are claiming things are happening that aren't really happening. Is this making sense?
This is making a lot of sense. This is so you're describing the problem of faith with the concrete example of the wedding and the marriage, and I'm thinking about the way in which in the West they by the 12th century talk about marriage as a sacrament, but they're trying to say this mystery of what's there, right? That there's a sign of a reality, and the sign of the reality, and they argue about which is the sign and which is why they have the arguments over the Eucharist. Exactly what does it becomes bread and wine for real mean? They're not. I mean, they're not. In fact, throughout the Middle Ages, they're never quite sure, because they recognize that they're pointing to a reality that they know is, but they don't know whether it. I guess in the fairy story thing, mystical, magical, or a mirror, right? Is it just a resemblance? Is it a magic trick, or is it a mystical referent? Yeah, I'm even more convinced that Tolkien's basically talking about the liturgy in this essay.
Well, if you're at a wedding ceremony, unless you're taking it as a mystical experience, which people do without really consciously thinking about it most of the time, but you've got a celebrant or a priest that's saying magic words, and suddenly if they're pronounced correctly, abracadabra, you've got a man and a woman who suddenly are this magical thing called husband and wife. I mean, that's magic trick. It's as much a magic trick as pulling the right card out of a deck when someone has said, "Oh, I got a ace of hearts," but it's a kind of liturgy that we haven't thrown away yet, which I find interesting, because it's like the joy and sorrow of the wedding. It's there. The joy and sorrow of the liturgy is in a wedding too. People are crying, they're sad and happy at the same time. The bride's about to leave her family. She's sad because she's going to enter married life. So there's some grief there. It's bittersweet. Right. So people that are not attending liturgies are still having this experience. They're just not doing it with the conscious understanding that they're participating in something which to the outside does look like magic, but within it, within the enchantment of the ceremony, it's real. And there's a realization of this creative experience, because everybody that's participating in it is creating something. They're creating a family. So when we have the Mass, the 16th century Protestants that are saying, oh, they're practicing magic. Well, we could say the same thing about a wedding. You're practicing magic. It's contract magic, isn't it? And then how do you answer this? Well, you either abandon the reality of something that you have to accept only via faith, which is love, or you admit that you're doing magic the same, in the same way that you would be accusing the Catholics of doing in the Eucharist, but you can't. I don't know if this is making sense.
I'm letting you surf tonight.
Okay, so
she sees. So right now we have an evangelist writing in front of a green screen. It's like all of these words better make sense, right? That we are. So I'd say I've been working on the Kickstarter with the dragons and studying the Tolkien course, but I'm also working on revising an article about the Salve Regina and describing Mary as advocate. And what I had to end up with is like, how do we feel this grace thing, right? I was also reading Tolkien and thinking about where does he say grace? It's like, it feels magical. Another of the Protestant, uncomfortablenesses with the ancient tradition is where Mary fits, and the swords pointing at his grief are her swords, the swords that pierce her soul when she recognizes what's to happen to her son. But that Mary can plead with Christ. And, and the ridiculing of the miracle stories is always, and she just overturns his justice. And there's nothing, it's like she can say anything and he'll do it because she's his mother. And there is something wrong with that. But until I was working on this paper, thinking about it, what exactly is grace when, for example, Christ is judging, and recognizing that there's grace in judgment as well as mercy. So you think Mary's pleading for mercy, it's just because, she gets to like overturn stuff, and you could say that's a kind of magical problem or something like that. But there is grace is that thing that comes in the moment when, and I realize it's kind of inspiration and spirit and stuff like that, but I've jumbled stuff together. Sorry. That how to describe these experiences that we know must be real, this presence of the spirit, or the presence of love, or the presence of grace, or the presence of faërie or dragons, or the mass, or what, all of these things, and yet they constantly keep being collapsed into, and my problem in my paper right now is it has to collapse into academic prose, which doesn't allow the existence of any of this stuff. And yet I was asked to do this talk because I was saying, can you talk about where grace goes in law? And I'm like, well, no, because what we're dealing with is whether are we living on a flat plane, or one that has a vertical dimension, which is supernatural, which is transcendent. And I think, do I get the next? Yeah, now I finally get the Tissot showing all the angels surrounding Christ, right? It's like, to what degree are we able to realize that we live in faërie, which is, the borders of faërie are touching us constantly, meaning the reality of the heavenly. And it's very interesting how the modern world, one, loves using all that green screen technology to make horror movies, which I don't watch, so I'm assuming they do, and monsters and scary stuff. And it's like we're very good at wanting monsters that would come to eat us, Q dragon, and less able to recognize that that realm has peril but also joy, and we're longing for both. I think I pulled all the thoughts I had together there.
No, this makes sense to me. This makes sense because the liturgy is perilous.
Oh, yes.
Because we face a kind of judgment. We face a kind of judgment when we receive the Eucharist. We're supposed to go to confession first and everything, but it is a kind of judgment, not just in the sense of, in a legalistic way, you haven't confessed, therefore you shouldn't be taking it, because if you do that, then it's not like this. We eat Christ, he eats us. We're taken into his body, into his church. So in doing this, we're not in control of the experience. What happens when we receive the Eucharist is entirely up to the king. It's entirely up to Christ, whose body it is, what will happen to us in the partaking of his body. So this is a kind of perilous experience, isn't it? Because there's no predicting what he's going to do with us once we've received his body and blood. We're taken into his body, and then it's thy will be done. Our sins, our character, things that are not dealt with at the time, things we're dealing with, everything falls into a kind of judgment experience, because we can't hide it. We're not hiding anymore. There's no veiling. The liturgy has unveiled us, unveiled the Holy of Holies. The separation between the congregation and the iconostasis is removed. So we're face to face with Christ in that time, which is beautiful, joyous experience, because it is a celebration. It's the feast, but at the same time there's peril there because there's potential judgment that we're going to experience in this eating unworthily. So this is why we pray in our liturgy, make us worthy to receive your body, make us worthy to pray, make us worthy to do this and that, because there is a judgment that is involved in the experience. It's perilous. It changes us. It's not just the ritualistic eating of something. You could going back again to the wedding ceremony example, but to think in the analogy of a wedding, because that's the place where Christ began his ministry with the people, was at a wedding. So this mystical unification of a man and a wife was fundamental to his beginning the ministry, and then the presence of his mother saying, turn the water into wine. So that there's a kind of peril in the experience, because the man and a woman are becoming united in one flesh. They take on each other's spiritual destiny. They take on the physical, the temporal, spatial destiny. Everything is changed in the enchantment of that ceremony, which to me is taking the Eucharist, because we're merging with Christ. So it makes sense that Tolkien would be seeing this and thinking to enter into the realm of Faërie. To me, this sounds like to enter into the realm of the wedding at Cana. Yeah, it fits.
I mean, it certainly fits the sort of ordinary sense of fairy story as a, romance king story. I mean, and that the Return of the King is actually a love story, because it's Aragorn has to win the kingdom in order to get the bride. So there's wedding, and that it is, it's multiple layers of the story that Tolkien is able to think in terms of, but it's definitely the love story and the romance. But he described the Mass as that, right? It's romance. It's the romance of humanity. And I always enjoy talking to you, because I feel like the Middle Ages just stepped out of Australia through the internet. I'm hearing you say things that nobody alive knows, except for everybody who's read medieval text. That your description of the liturgy, and I know you're coming from your own catechism and your own and the Coptic tradition, it sounds exactly like what the 12th century commentators on the Song of Songs say is happening in the Incarnation, that it's the wedding of humanity and the divinity in the womb of the Virgin. So it's a wedding always. And so it always gives me great joy that you know this. because otherwise it's there in the, you know, this scholarship, and I'm sort of thinking, it's like, oh, you know, Caroline, she did all this work to show us all what happens in the, you know, in Holy Feast and Holy Fast and the experience of the liturgy, and to realize that they're Christians alive now, talk about time travel, that still see all of that mystery in the liturgy, and that somehow, you know, it's like, talk about Anglo and whitewashed, right? We lost it all.
Yes, that was my next point. But this is why I say to everybody, you need to go to Africa. You have to become Africanized if you want to reclaim your heritage, which sounds like a contradiction and understand the history of the Christian.
Right.
Because you've whitewashed yourselves. It's not like this person who made the comment earlier saying, oh, you know, St. Augustine was definitely white. No, he wasn't. What continent was he born on? How did he describe himself? How did he describe his mother, who was a Berber? A Berber's white. He described himself as an African. We're talking about geography, but we're talking about cultural geography. We're talking about the way that the church flourished and the kinds of thought processes that were happening amongst the people in the early church. And it wasn't Anglo-Saxon, you know, Enlightenment thought processes whatsoever. So the language that is being thrown on us is inadequate. It's bleached. It has no color. So to try and explain liturgical thinking in this kind of environment is hard, because
right,
I'm dealing with a kind of linguistic world as a Copt where I'm fighting colonialism in trying to express how we think liturgically all the time. And in like a environment where, how should I put this? People that are thinking that the tradition is 19th century nationalism will struggle with this as well, because this is not an industrialized way of thinking. This is a catechized way of thinking. It's not industrial, it's liturgical. They're different, which might hopefully makes a little bit more sense after you've explained Faërie. But the West has lost its
lost its fantasy in the capital F version that Tolkien tried to recover for the English. I mean, that's what he said. He wrote the stories for England, for the mythology that the English lost, ironically, right? It's like you're saying that the English, the Anglo-Saxon, he, you know, is a scholar of Old English, literally the Anglo-Saxon language, and wanting to write stories that have that feel that he found in the Old English Christian poetry. I mean, Beowulf, dragon, cue dragon. You'll be happy to know that Silent Draco, who is the one saying that about St. Augustine, is agreeing with you on a lot of the liturgical stuff. He's
oh, good. I mean, like, I'm not talking badly against you.
I mean, he's the Silent Dragon, who I'm making speak a lot tonight because he's there in the chat all the time. He says, kilts.
Yes.
This is Silent Draco. Kilts. Yes, in Eucharist we are judged by the presence. Are we found wanting or given a mission for him?
Yeah.
Yes. So
exactly.
So Silent Draco is actually he's with you on most things, but
he gets it. Silent Draco, you know, gets it.
The dragon, that Tolkien wanted was the Beowulf dragon, and in the sense of what kind of story reality is there that we lost, and that Tolkien's writing this. He's writing it for England, for my country, for the mythology that vanished on us.
Yeah.
And he says,
like when English lost gender, right?
Yes.
So it's the same thing. It's like trying to speak the old English that had gender to modern English speakers, right? So it's like almost like speaking in a completely different. It is a different language now. I mean, it's like losing the fairy, losing the enchantment in the English world is the same thing as losing gender in the English language. How do you put that back after you've lost it?
Right.
I don't know how you do it with linguistic genders, but you can do it with the liturgy. It's just, yes, the
Well, what Tolkien did was with everybody who's subscribed to Unauthorized can watch my entire series in the Forge of Tolkien of these, particularly these problems of thinking about language and history, and it's all there, right? That he sees philology, language history, as the path back in time to the reality of Faërie. And he does this in a lot of his different stories. I mean, he does it obviously in the Lord of the Rings, where he has them with the invented languages and such, but it's those invented languages are in fact efforts to travel back in time. So your time travel insight was spot on. that we're traveling in history into this secondary reality, which is in fact our primary reality, in the sense that we belong there in the liturgy. And he's trying to have access to that in a way that without the layers of meaning that the liturgy carries, people can't even see, right? It's like you're doing nothing but looking at the green screen, and there's nothing projected on it for you through the eyes of faith. So you don't see the angels. Showing now here the biblically accurate angel from the fabulous animation, which shows it like the blinking eyes and the wings and the whiteness. It's all white. It's topical for this, but that we can't see the angels, and yet they're always there.
Sorry, I got this.
So all we see now, we have the Tissot image of the priest bowing before the ark. All we see them doing is those ritual gestures in front of the ark, but we don't see the presence that they are witnessing.
I mean, I'm sure some people have, but
well, we as in the modernist, materialist, secularist, enlightened. Oh
yeah.
All myths are nonsense. Because we were talking about myth last time with Girard and the scapegoat and the problem of mythology concealing the sacrifice, which is one layer of it. But now we're trying to get to this. Tolkien, the fantasy industry is enormous. The movie industry of green screen projection of other realities is enormous, because we're clearly participating in this desire for dragons. That
yes.
The dragon is the motif tonight. the stuffed one that I keep putting across the screen. That Tolkien taps into, and this also comes up in my course, and I explored in the Tolkien videos, how people are, Americans are still embarrassed by this longing for fantasy, even as we make it into a giant industry. It's like we can make money off of it. Okay, it's okay. The contract magic, right? The spinning of gold magic, the dragons on the top of piles of treasure magic. But I
have a theory. Okay. Sorry.
The soul, but the soul participation that Tolkien was actually trying to describe of what it happens when we're enchanted and find ourselves in that reality is curiously, it's like we're embarrassed by it. We would not, to say a McLuhan-y thing, we would not be in the problem we are right now with the media and the problem with people's emotional reactions to this absorption in the media, if in fact we were more honest about our desire to be absorbed into that reality.
It's a frigidity. There's a Western frigidity. It's Western frigidity. It's not physical. It's spiritual frigidness. That's the Anglo problem. And it's because they've rejected the Song of Solomon. Because of this mystical wedding that the West are not participating in the liturgy, and also Westerners being quite shy to read that love song expressively and to participate in it themselves. I'm thinking modernity would not produce a Song of Solomon. We don't have that love. We don't have that deep, passionate, Solomonic desire for God. which is why I think I sound the way I sound, because it was Solomonic people that brought me into the Coptic faith. And the Semites have this inherent understanding of the richness and beauty of the unification between the lover and the beloved. It's embedded linguistically in the language with the way that they speak, the gender in the language that English has lost, which really, I mean, in my brain, English lost its Semitic nature in this kind of way of thinking about how the language works. But the West also is very uncomfortable with this kind of depth of passion. It's not expressive, it's become frigid. So that's kind of a
Frozen even.
Spiritual damage.
Frozen. Why Frozen is such a problem.
Yeah. So I was making the joke this week about, Muammar Gaddafi's son, the hot one that died. But it was this kind of meditation on that part of the world and that kind of culture when they fall in love, and all of the poetry that happens when they fall in love. And the Western world wants it. We're producing love songs all the time. It's infused in pop music, and it's pretty much the only thing that musicians will ever write or sing about. But in terms of our culture as New World Westerners, the white Anglo culture is cold. It does not have it, which is why this reporting on what the Lebanese are up to, it casts a shadow over everything else, because that passion is missing. It's gone from the Anglo culture. And so when they see it in others, when they see it in Catholics, it's terrifying to them, because they're looking at something that they don't have, they haven't participated in for a very long time.
They used to have it. They used to have Mary. They used to have, I mean, my first book on the commentaries on the Song of Songs, several of the texts are by people who were English, lived in England. And it's like we continue to meditate on the tragedy of the 16th century and the erasure of this liturgical life. We're going to read from the Song of Songs for a moment. Let him kiss me with the kiss of his mouth, for thy breasts are better than wine. Smelling sweet of the best ointments, thy name is as oil poured out, therefore young maidens have loved thee. Draw me, we will run after thee to the odor of thy ointments. The king has brought me into his storerooms. We will be glad and rejoice in thee, remembering thy breasts more than wine. The righteous love thee. I am black but beautiful, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of cedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Which I could go on, right? But which, of course, is all commented in the medieval tradition as a wedding of Christ and humanity, or Christ and Mary in the liturgical meditations. But this you were right. Your insight, the inspiration that you had was totally correct. That we are always talking about this wedding in the liturgical context. And that we don't see this joy in the, I mean, not just in the fertility, which is the sadness of the present, but in this, it's all like colors and blending and beauty and joy. And that's what Tolkien is constantly trying to describe in his fairy stories. It's like the wine and and so it's ironic to me, of course, that anybody ever says that Tolkien, is boring for women to read. It's like, are you kidding? It's just simmering constantly, right? He's doing nothing but telling his love for his wife and the great love story that they lived,
It's
right? His
hard.
Baron and Luthien story. But it's like, how can you be in the presence of someone who is so much in love and not get it?
Yeah. The Anglosphere concussion. I don't know.
That they can't see when the priest goes in and is at the ark is the presence of Christ in the incense and song, and that all of this liturgical performance is about. And now we've come back around to here Christ is not on the altar but on the ark, which is saying that temple liturgy is fulfilled in Christ. The presence of Christ on the altar in the St. Gregory Masses is meant to be showing the presence of God in this realization. But, go back to our previous episode with the Girardian scapegoat problem. It's like we've been transformed by the crucifixion to see the reality of God's love for us. It is,
which is why
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, this is why the Lebanese were angry.
Yes.
Because you can't have love without anger. They're in love with Christ. The culture has fallen in love with Christ. They're animated by this Solomonic desire. And so when you have a bunch of fluoro-haired neo-Vikings that try and storm your church where your beloved comes to visit you on the altar and give you his body and his blood, of course you're going to get angry. Then, of course, they smash a crucifix in the process. So they're defacing an icon of the beloved. And then all the whites are wondering why the wogs are getting angry. It's because they're in love and you're barbarians. Anglo-barbarians. And the Neo-Vikings don't get it. So then they're saying, oh, they're white supremacists. Because they don't have the language to even conceptualize this as a reality. They've lost it. I don't know what language they're speaking, but it's this magical thinking of the priest is there and bada boom, and then they think abracadabra turns into it turns into something else because they don't have the wine. The water is not being turned into wine for them.
Well, this is our problem, right? It's like what we're trying to accomplish in our arc travels is we somehow, you by way of your, we both came at it from different directions in terms of our journey. You through the Catechism and the Coptic Church, me through all this reading of medieval texts, and you say, and suddenly we find we're talking about the same thing, and nobody else in the world, nobody else, right? It's hard for those in our usual environments in the Anglo world to understand what we're talking about, and we just sound nuts. And so Tolkien does try to explain. Tolkien successfully explains all of this to C.S. Lewis, who then becomes Christian but not Catholic, which is a little bit of a problem. And then Lewis, spends his life trying to convey this insight that he had, this moment of joy, surprised by joy. He talks about that in his conversion story, of being able to get that the myths are real in this way that he had been longing for all along, and that they're more real than real. And the both of them became very popular, for their storytelling, suggests that the hunger is there, that people want this liturgical experience. But therefore, it's curious that there can still be so much resistance in different ways, right? And I think you and I are you and I are navigating a lot of different conversations to figure out, saying it's embarrassing, or it's. Casey had been saying earlier, embarrassed by mystery, right? That mystery does seem to be embarrassing. We want science to have proved everything, and the mysteries to be unlocked, and no more mysteries. And it's like, but do you really want to live in a context in which there's no mystery? It means there's nothing but the flat of the natural, right? No supernatural.
But this is how the Anglo polices the Celt in Australia. Right. This is what they did, which is why I continuously talk about this topic. Now you framed it, and I'm really happy that you did, because they're embarrassed, and then they're trying to police other people from entering Faërie. They're trying to police Celts from retaining this enchanted religious reality. And then whenever anybody says, okay, so this is our culture, this is our religion, this is who we are, we're explaining to you. You don't get to explain to us who we are. We're explaining to you who we are. We're ashamed for it. And you see it in the way people correct me all the time when I say Lebanese aren't white or St. Augustine is not white. People instantly correct me. I know what I'm talking about. We know who we are. We know who we're talking about. We get to explain it to you. This is the colonial problem. And this is a big issue with the leftists, because I think fundamentally deep down, everybody that's been damaged by the English language, the post-16th century Enlightenment Anglosphere that tried to disenchant the planet in this capitalistic, like, mass global supply chain supermarket experience, right? You've got all of these indigenous people and you've got all of these different cultures that have been smooshed into this supply chain, and they're angry. They're turning to leftism. They're saying, blah, 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 white supremacy, this, that. We're going to pull down the statues of all the old white men, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Conservatives look at this and they say this is anti-white hatred. I don't look at it like this. I look at it and I go, I see a bunch of indigenous people that got absorbed into a global supply chain by force in many cases. They had their languages and their cultures disenchanted. Then they were fed this frigid way of behaving and speaking, and now they're angry, and that's why they're trying to decolonize everything. They want to be Catholics, indigenous Catholics, with an actual expression and experience of the iconostasis, entering Faërie, entering this time travel experience. Because everyone running on Greenwich isn't time traveling. It's just around and around and around.
Yep.
So you're stuck. You're stuck in Greenwich. So no wonder they're all like, this sucks. I mean, is it any wonder? The funny thing is, when we're trying to defend ourselves from being colonized, we get called white supremacists. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that. So that's why I'm always hitting back at this language, because I don't want to speak that dialect, whatever it is. I don't know what you call it. The supply chain dialect. I don't want to speak it anymore.
Well, it's the white English, ironically. Right. What Tolkien wanted to write in was, and this is what he said,
he was writing in dragon.
He was writing in dragon.
Yeah. He's
writing in dragon because he has this lovely discussion about the power of language and enchantment and how it works. His essay is also very confusing, and he says things in 8 different places, and I get lost in where he said them, so I'm not finding it. Oh, here I found spell, finally. He's talking about mythology and stories about Odin the Goth and the Necromancer, the Glitter of Crows, blah, blah, blah. Small wonder that spell means both a story told, a spell, a story, and a formula of power over living men. Stories are spells, which we knew, and now we have the... Okay, this is one of the most famous passages for me, and he's talking about the power of language, and the way its relationship to story, therefore mythology, and say our incarnation is part of our reality of telling stories. The incarnate mind, the tongue, and the tail are in our world coeval. So it's not, mythology is not a disease of language and allegory and things like that, but language is somehow a product of the storytelling, right? The human mind endowed with the powers of generalization and abstraction sees not only green grass, discriminating it from other things and finding it fair to look upon, but sees that it is green as well as being grass. But how powerful, how stimulating to the very faculty that produced it was the invention of the adjective. No spell or incantation in Faërie is more potent, and that is not surprising. Such incantations might indeed be said to be only another view of adjectives, a part of speech in a mythical grammar. The mind that thought of light, heavy, gray, yellow, still, swift, also conceived of magic that would make heavy things light and able to fly, turn gray lead into yellow gold, and the still rock into swift water. If it could do the one, it could do the other. It inevitably did both. When we can take green from grass, blue from heaven, and red from blood, we have already an enchanter's power upon one plane, and the desire to wield that power in the world external to our minds awakes. It does not follow that we shall use that power well upon any plane. We may put a deadly green upon a man's face and produce a horror. We may make the rare and terrible blue moon to shine. Or we may cause woods to spring with silver leaves and rams to wear fleeces of gold and put hot fire into the belly of a cold worm. But in such fantasy, as it is called, new form is made. Faërie begins. Man becomes a subcreator. When he got alchemy in there, lead into yellow gold, but also the problem of the mass, speaking the words in the transformation, yes. This is my body. So that's the one level, that language and adjective is describing things as they are and as they might be. And transformation by way of description is the power of fantasy. But then it flips over, and this is what you say, that by way of fantasy, we actually see our world clearly. That we do see the green grass, we do see the yellow sun, we do see the beautiful, and that taking one takes the other away. We can't see clearly without fantasy. And so all of this desire to it's like all of the advertisements and the magic spells of making us want things that we don't want or that are bad for us and so forth. The flip side of description that in fact brings joy. And it's ironic that it's English that's being used to both murder that joy and, of course, for me and in my study with Tolkien and us for our writing Draco Alchemicus, to recover that ability to see the dragon, the great green dragon that Tolkien says he wanted when he was a child.
Well, it's necessary. It's necessary because that's the energy of civilization. It's transformative. And without it, we only have one other solution to obtain the energy for civilization, which is Aztec style heart harvests to keep the sun burning.
Yep.
So this is why our mass is not the same thing as the Aztec human sacrifice. Because they had to feed the dragon, where ours feeds us to bring us into the supernatural. We eat him. He doesn't eat us.
That kid's a dragon. I think so. We've come to the place where I go to mass, and the steps are not showing yet the image that those of us who know where to stand will see. So we've convinced our audience right now. Silent Draco and Casey are having a nice conversation about spells. Casey's saying spell is also a measure of time, as in sit for a spell. Sit for a spell is a very Southern Older English expression. So we have spell as time.
That Greenwich strikes again.
And Silent Draco saying, yes, Casey, it's a specific, allowed, but not measured time, perhaps expressed in pots, pitchers of tea. Casey, yes, spell is best defined as for a little while. Casey, English is a very flexible language. Could Tolkien have written in any other language? Well, no, because he's actually writing the English mythology, which, given how powerful now English is as the vending machine world, we do want to recover that mythology because we're all in it. But he also, the thing is, what Tolkien loved all languages, not all languages. He liked some of them better. He said they were like flavors, right? So he had wine, you know, and he loved Spanish because his guardian, Father Francis Morgan, spoke Spanish. He loved Welsh. He loved Finnish. He could taste them as different flavors, but he felt like English had lost all of its flavor, I think. So he was writing in English because he wanted to give us our flavor back. He wanted to give us the vision of the angels in the presence of the host that we see at Mass if we are in the right place with St. Gregory saying that Mass, whereas otherwise we just see some guy in a dress doing a funny dance.
Yep. And potentially some voodoo.
So we come back full circle to our salvific, satanic, salvific. Do not think that we have finished with this topic, because it's that, where does it come? So Tolkien describes that moment when in the eucatastrophe it happens, and in the stories you get that piercing glimpse of joy and heart's desire that for a moment passes outside the frame, rends indeed the very web of story, and lets a gleam come through. Those of us who see that and have that, want that over and over and over again. There are certain passages in the Lord of the Rings I cannot read without weeping, because they are that turn when you suddenly realize you're in it. You've gone from being, go back to the steps, right? You've gone from not being able to see, and then to being able to see that you are in that story. And we hope, by way of sharing our joy, that we can help you stand in that place with us. But what do we do for those who can't yet see, other than pray?
Yeah. I mean,
who see only the white of the death and the ghosts and the Anglo bones of empire.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that Jolly Roger.
Yeah.
There's no flesh on it. So we just make poetry.
Ooh, good answer. Dragon. Learn to scan. Read our poem.
Hopefully we can get the English. Yeah, hopefully we can get that English heartbeat going again with our iambic, because the corpse is really
kind of stinky. we want you to learn to scan with us in Draco Alchemicus. Watch for our Kickstarter.
Yes.
To be continued.
Give us money.
We be pirates here. We told you that at the beginning.
She's a grifter.
Yeah. Oh, I've got my grifter gem. I'm not
grifting. I still have it's a very
grifter
different
gem of the descent of the Holy Spirit in our pigeon cloud. Don't you want to know what this mystery is? Yes, you do. Okay, well, we've had a stalwart crew hanging out with us tonight. Thank you all for joining us. I promise to do my intro right next time and not have the intro music before the... Oh, no. All of the magic has to happen correctly, or we don't bring you in to the arc where we hope you see what we can see. Or you see something different because we're looking at our cameras anyway. Good? We did good?
Yeah, I think so. I think we time traveled pretty well today.
Okay, good. To be continued. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.